Let me give you a small tour de force. And starting, and one can do the starting point whenever one wants, but perhaps pertinent in our context, the starting point could be, or should be, October 7th, 2023. When Hamas attacked Israel, the Islamic Republic was the only state in the international system that celebrated this attack. But the entire post-October 7th period turned out to be a double-edged sword. And it turned out that once, the sharper side of that sword increasingly threatened the very heart of the Islamic Republic. Within only half a week, the Iranian rhetoric of support backpedaled under the impression of the United States sending aircraft carrier to the Eastern Mediterranean as a warning to Hezbollah and Tehran not to get fully involved in the war. After that, we've seen the continuation of the usual rhetoric out of Tehran, contrasted with some kind of reluctance on the ground, also when it came to the potential activation of Hezbollah, the crown jewel of Iran's axis of resistance, into that war, albeit there was a northern front, but it was quite, managed, so to speak. And then when the year 2024 started, Israel embarked on an assassination campaign against top leaders of the Iran-Hamas-Hezbollah trio, killing top military leaders from those three actors, from the Iranian side, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and their chief representatives and military commanders in the entire region. And by mid-January 2024, things got really bad in terms of the Iranian regime's legitimacy and standing within its domestic but also regional social base, so that all of a sudden Iran attacked some of its neighbors, northern Iraq, Syria and Pakistan even, with missiles. And no one knows what the whole issue was about, but the Iraqi foreign minister at that time analyzed it perfectly, saying that the Iranians were exporting their internal problems because they had this credibility problem because of that gulf between fire rhetoric and reluctance on the ground. By the summer of 24, we've seen a new phase of Israeli operations targeting on the day of the inauguration of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who was again glorified in Europe and in the West to be a liberalizer, reformer, and so forth, by killing the Politburo chief of Hamas at the heart of Tehran in an IRGC-controlled compound in a surgical strike, which was a huge embarrassment for the Islamic Republic of Iran and which showed that the power center of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is composed of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and his court, Beit al-Ahbari, a quasi-parallel government, and the IRGC were totally infiltrated by Israeli intelligence. And then, a few weeks later, the then defense minister of Israel announced a new phase of the war. And this new phase of the war was destined to target the main tentacles of the octopus. From the Israeli strategic perspective, the octopus being the Islamic Republic of Iran, the tentacles, different parts of those militias within the axis of resistance. And of course, in September, what we saw was probably the most important point, which was the decapitation and decimation of Hezbollah in two acts. The first acts were the pager explosions, killing around 3,000 or 4,000 Hezbollah, military people. And then the second act led to the entire military destruction, financial destruction, and the killing of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who within this Iran-led axis of resistance has been the second most important figure after the Iran Supreme Leader, after Qasem Soleimani, who was the IRGC regional chief, so to speak, was killed at the beginning of 2020 upon Trump's order. So this was a huge, incident or event that basically was, was the most important factor in this unraveling of the axis of resistance. There was a lot of frustration within Hezbollah supporters as to Iranian strategy, and there's also indications that also this operation in Lebanon has also been, very much based on this kind of Israeli infiltration, not only of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but of the IRGC Quds force, which is the regional arm of the IRGC. And for the Iranian proxies, they had to realize that their Iranian patron is fully infiltrated by none other than the common enemy. So the unraveling of the axis of resistance, which is a historic turning point over the last year, has different dimensions. It has a military component, it has a political ideological component in terms of the, how the proxies view the Islamic Republic of Iran, how also some elements within the system itself, hardline supporters view the Islamic Republic. An intelligence factor, and this intelligence factor is, in my view, and I've been arguing that before those last 30 hours, is that it's the most important factor when to argue against the notion that no, this is a network and you cannot destroy networks. A main currency in networks is trust. If you do not trust your patron, if you know fully well that your patron is fully infiltrated by the common enemy, then this, factor cannot hold. This argument cannot hold. So, and of course, the quick collapse of the Assad regime in December was only a logical conclusion to what happened with Hezbollah in Lebanon, because the Assad regime had been in trouble in the wake of the first wave of the Arab uprisings by the mid-2010s, with the support of Iran underground, together with different militias, including thousands of Hezbollah fighters, and Russia from the air could be saved. But this time around, Russians were preoccupied with Ukraine, the Iranians and their regional network was in shambles, and Hezbollah was basically non-existent. So this quick collapse is a huge issue as well, because Syria was the indispensable route for Iranian deliveries to Hezbollah. And according to major Iranian, IRGC chiefs, losing Syria would be much worse than losing Khuzestan, which is the oil-rich southwestern province where I grew up as a little kid during the Iran-Iraq War. So the Islamic Republic of Iran turned out to be an emperor without clothes. Regionally, definitely so. This axis was in ruins, but the Islamic Republic of Iran over the last decade has also turned an emperor without clothes at home, with what I call the start of a long-term revolutionary process in Iran from the turn of the year 2017-18, when we saw a nationwide uprising that was led by the lower classes, with hitherto considered to be the social base of the regime. And this was a shock moment to the entire establishment, because they realized that their social base is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. We had the de facto continuation of this uprising in November 2019, with also the lower middle classes joining, and with participation of 200,000 people instead of 50,000 in 100 cities and towns all over the country, which was brutally repressed, at least 1,500 people killed in the streets of Iran. And then we had the erstwhile culmination of that process with the Women Life Freedom Uprising in the autumn of 22, which saw a much larger social base, larger parts of the middle class, the lower classes, the women and the youth at the forefront this time around. with the participation of probably 2 million people, again in 150 cities all over the country. And from that moment on, the top regime officials and the IRGC officials knew fully well that the main threat emanating to regime survival is coming from the inside. Knowing, and according to memos that were leaked by then, that 80% of the population would sympathize with this revolutionary uprising, but not, of course, all of them would take part in it, which is also a complicated issue. Be it as it may, we've then reverted back in our discourse on Iran that no, the Islamic Republic is stable again. But it's a pseudo-stability because of structural crises, socioeconomic, political, the center of gravity, ecological, and the gender gap being driving forces of this long-term revolutionary process, with a political elite that monopolizes economic power, having no answers whatsoever to any of those raging crises. And today, Iran is in a state of probably the most gravest economic crisis since 1979. With official inflation rates of 45% over the last half a decade, with increasing poverty, leaving the majority of Iranians in a state of poverty, with a large part also of the middle class, with high unemployment rates. Do not trust the figures. According to that you're seeing, according to the Statistical Center of Iran, those working 1 hour per week are not included in the unemployment figures. So the socioeconomic misery of the Iran people is huge. You've seen electricity shortages over the last months. We've seen now a 2-week, since 2 weeks, we've seen a truckers' drivers strike. Before that, we've seen the explosion of the most important international trade port of Iran on the day of the third round of negotiations. Now, so the domestic situation is really bad, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a scenario that has been out there that during such military action that we're currently seeing, there's going to be a mass uprising at the same time. But again, this would be the nightmare scenario of the Islamic Republic. The first reaction that the Iranians did after Israel attacked them was to deploy security forces in key squares in Tehran. But of course, they cannot survive this dual threat from outside and from the inside. So if this materializes at some point, they cannot survive that. And for the Israelis, they have embarked to complete their octopus strategy, now targeting the head of the octopus, with the dual threat, as they see it, coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been much more cemented because of post-October 7th experiences. The dual threat not only being the nuclear program, but the ballistic missile program, which could overwhelm Israeli air defenses. And the Israelis were able to intercept over 90% of them during the first 2 direct attacks of Iran last April and October. But now we've also somehow entered in uncharted waters, but with no good policy, with no good options left for the Islamic Republic. Because the main point of, I'm going to close now. The main point, is this a new, approaching? Okay.
Very soft approach. I mean, no assault of any kind.
Yeah. No, they have no good options left. They cannot win a war against Israel, let alone against Israel and the United States. They don't have the option to destabilize the Gulf, as they did in the wake of Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018-19. They would endanger this kind of process of rapprochement, but they might resort to that if need be.
If need be, Ali, I'm sorry, we'll have time to discuss with the other panelists.
But I have to go, unfortunately.
I'm sure you don't want to deprive Dima of any of his.
Sorry, I didn't hear that, by the way.
Time.
Yeah.
Oh,
If
okay. So I have.
Did you do that?
Of course.
Oh my God. Okay.
So.